but he said, I'm going to do the singing and Dawn's going to do the preaching. And she did a lesson. It was a book, and I don't know if it's still in print or not, but it's, "Oh No, It's Sabbath, and I'm Not Ready." And so she did a synopsis of that book, and basically it's, when do you start preparing for the Sabbath? And you start Saturday night when the Sabbath goes down. When the Sabbath ends, that's when. And so she had formulated for her house, and she shared what she did. And it was, certain days of the week she did the laundry, other days she dusted, and so she did cleaning of her house and preparation of her house for Sabbath throughout the week, so that when it came to Fridays, which is the preparation day, that day was specifically for tidying up and finishing the things that maybe she didn't get a chance to do. The kids were sick, she had to go to the doctor, whatever it was that interrupted the schedule. Finish the preparations of the things that needed to be done, food preparation for the Sabbath, and so that whenever Friday night came, it's not a complete exhaustion in that, I had to hurry and do everything on Friday because I wasn't preparing throughout the week. And I think is just a great illustration, is that, we need to start making preparations for the Sabbath Saturday night. We need to be thinking in our mind what needs to be done this week so that I can be prepared for the Sabbath. It's not so much about preparing the house as it is preparing my heart and my mind. Steve?
Okay, I like the way partly Finley put it as well. It's not as much as focusing on the do nots, which it's very heavily and easily to fall into. That's what the Pharisees did. That's what happens to them. That's why they had 1,000,001 do not rules. It's more important to focus on God himself, what his purpose of the Sabbath was, and to follow through within that. Because if we get caught in the do nots, it's very easily to lose the purpose of the Sabbath and just focus on, I didn't do any of these things, therefore we're great. It's really easy to not do work and not do this and not do that, but you never really entered into that relationship with God that day. You never went out and you never helped your fellow man and showed him God's love that day. You never went and did the actual purpose of the Sabbath. It's very, very easily to fall into. I'm sure we've all done it many a time. But as Finley put it, we need to work on trying to use the purpose of the Sabbath. What was God's purpose with it? And to move into that relationship with him. As you mentioned, it's a mindset we've got to come into. And it can't be just a last minute thing, because we're not ready for it then. When Christ went out on the Sabbath, he didn't focus in every other word on what not to do. He went out and he just did. He spent that time with God. He spent the time with his fellow man, helping them, loving them, and showing these things. So much so, he infuriated the Pharisees beyond end, because he was doing things, they put their hedges out around to keep from out doing, but he went and stepped on some of those. But we need to keep in mind, when it comes to keeping the Sabbath, it's all about the purpose of the Sabbath. And when we lose that, we've lost the whole meaning for it. Because it's wonderful to say, I didn't work, I didn't do financial transactions, I didn't do these things. But if you never followed through with the purpose of the Sabbath, it was lost on you. It was lost on you, period. The whole purpose is to have that love between you and God to grow, and the you and fellow man to grow, and to be able to share that as well. That's the whole purpose of the Sabbath. As he mentioned, Ellen White said, if we were to truly keep the Sabbath as it was supposed to be, there wouldn't have been all these other religions. The whole point of the Sabbath, when you read it, in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth. He goes to remind you afterwards. It was supposed to be a memorial and a commemoration of what God did. And if we truly look back every week and remembered what God did for us, what he did, who he really was, none of these other religions would have ever had a foothold from the beginning. So when we lose the focus and the purpose of it, we lose out of the whole blessing of the Sabbath.
Dieter up front here.
it's also significant that it says, remember the Sabbath. So with other words, God knows that we would easily forget it. And it's the one actually that's easiest forgotten. All the others, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, it's not so easy to forget them because they're with us all the time. Crimes happen all the time. So we always remembered by those. But the Sabbath obviously has been sort of covered up with all kinds of clutter on top of it, and we easily forget it. So the remember the Sabbath is very significant. It's the only one that has that pre-clause, basically.
Yes.
When we analyze closely the commandment of God, we will not be persecuted for any other than the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's something that we have to take in considerations. You will not be persecuted for stealing. You will not be persecuted for even commit adultery. We should not do those. But the Sabbath is the pivotal point. And then I think Ellen White on the book Testimony for the Church, if you have that, read, I think, chapter 44, about the observance of the Sabbath. And then there is another book also, Counsel for the Church. Those was writing for us. We should go back and then think of them about the observance of the Sabbath, the things that we should not do. Because they are right there. There is nothing. And then she said also on Testimony for the Church, she said, every week we should have a reevaluations on the spiritual level. Is it gain or if that was a loss? So if it was a gain, so we keep moving because we need to press forward. So it is vital important for us to know what to do and then what we should do. And then it is not tomorrow, I think it is now.
It's interesting, it repeats things in creation. The books of Revelation and Daniel, the prophecies are repeated. It's in the repeating that there's more information given. And it's the same here with the Sabbath. We're given a general idea about the Sabbath, but it's not until you get to Exodus 20 and the giving of the Ten Commandments that we get a little bit more information about the Sabbath. So turn to Exodus chapter 20. And he says these words in verse 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not work, should not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gate. For, here's the for. Here's the reason why. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. This hallowed it is not included in the Genesis story. The word hallowed is added here in the Exodus version of the Ten Commandments. What does it mean to hallow something? Set apart is another word that's often used. Yeah, but to hallow something is to set it apart. The Sabbath is set apart for something special. I know when we joined the church, there were quite a few things that we were taught, and that was there were special things that you did on the Sabbath. And some of that was the clothing that you wore. You wore special clothing on the Sabbath day. You didn't you didn't wear the common things you wore during the week. You wore special things. The food oftentimes was special. The children's toys were not the toys that they played with all week long. We had separate toys that we kept that they got to you to play with and to have just on the Sabbath day. And then it was after the Sabbath, it was put away and kept from them so that they learned to appreciate and know that their toys were even different on the Sabbath day.
Yeah, it takes some purposeful planning to do that. It doesn't just happen.
Yes.
You know, there's probably two ditches. One is to become so involved in the checklist that becomes an end in itself. The other ditch is to drift in and out of the Sabbath as though you don't even know when it is. Oh, half an hour after, you know, Sabbath started a half hour ago, but I'm still working and I wasn't paying attention. We're told to guard the edges of the Sabbath for a reason, because it's so easy to do just the opposite of what you said, to just make it casual and make it just like every other day, except for I go to church, or except for I don't punch the time clock. So it does take purposeful planning and effort. Mrs. White says, as you mentioned, she said it's good to make a special food, a special treat on the Sabbath to make the Sabbath a special blessing, and that takes thought and planning sometimes and effort.
It takes knowing what are the favorite meals, you know. One thing that we did too, and that we've gotten out of the habit of it since the kids have left and grown, is we used to get, you know, the sparkling cider or some kind of a special fruit drink, and then we would, when we sat down for the Friday evening meal, we would have a toast, and we took turns doing the toast so that the kids, you know, we'd have this special drink. We don't drink a lot with our meals, but we kind of started off with this, that we had a special toast on Friday night, you know, to something that we're thankful for, something that we were blessed with during the week or whatever. But we allowed the children to be able to participate and to kind of lead out, and then they were in charge of the Sabbath activity as well. If they wanted to go on a hike, if they wanted to play a certain Sabbath game or whatever, they were in charge of kind of how that Sabbath went. So it gave them some ownership of things that could be done, and if it was something that needed some guidance, then we could guide it that direction. But Sabbath needs to be a family time together, and we're only limited by our imagination as to what we can do to make it special. What's special for my family might not be special for yours. So that's why it needs to be engineered or tailored to your family so that it benefits you in the best way. And then you can learn to appreciate, you know, some different things from the child's perspective of the Sabbath. So there's a lot that we can do to be able to enhance the Sabbath and being prepared for it. And simply making it special. But if we don't give our children ownership of it, if we do all the dictating of it, then it's only from our perspective, and you know they don't seem to take ownership of it. We have to let them take ownership of it and encourage them in that as well. Okay, after the children of Israel were basically, after they failed to guard the edges of the Sabbath, they were taken into captivity, which is basically what happened. And this is the understanding that I have as to why they came up with, you know, lighting a candle, you know, 30 minutes before Sabbath so that you could finish all the little things, because they failed to keep the Sabbath and they were taken into captivity. The Lord allowed them to be, you know, taken captive from these other countries. And so in order to keep from falling into those things, we're told that the Sabbath is a hedge. Well, the Jews basically built a hedge before the hedge. And they exalted their hedge above the Lord's hedge, so that they came up with all these things where you couldn't carry a handkerchief in your pocket on the Sabbath day because that was carrying a burden. And all these other things that they did was, and they regarded their laws as superior to God's law. So they were taken captive. And after the Lord delivered them through Moses, if you want to turn to Leviticus 22, the Lord caused something to happen when these slaves are given their freedom. How did God reinstitute or emphasize in their mind what the Sabbath day was? In Leviticus 22, verse 29, it says, nope, that's not it. Yeah, let me get to 22. Verse 29, it says, "And when you offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving unto the Lord, offer it at your own will. On the same day it shall be eaten up. Ye shall leave none of it until the morrow. I am the Lord. Therefore shall you keep my commandments and do them. I am the Lord. Neither shall you profane my holy name, but I will be hallowed among the children of Israel. I am the Lord which hallow you, that brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am your Lord." So not only does the Lord hallow his day, not only is he hallowed, but he wants to hallow us as well. I kind of skipped over the other part there. 6 verse 9. Joy alluded to it in her remarks this morning. Can somebody read Matthew 6 verse 9 for us?
"And after this manner therefore pray ye, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name."
So in the Lord's Prayer that Christ taught the disciples and us to pray, that needs to be mentioned in our prayer. That needs to be a reminder to us that the God that we're praying to is not just some idol, but he himself is hallowed. He is holy. He is set apart.
Haggai 1:7 says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." I heard a whole sermon that was entitled, "Consider Your Ways." And, it's so easy to go on automatic. Word association. You hear a word, psychiatrists used to do that. They put you down on the couch and say a word, and then what's your reaction? What's your first? And we're programmed to respond without thinking. And, especially regarding the Sabbath, it's good to consider our ways. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is our purpose? Rather than just kind of going on automatic. I'm supposed to do this. This is the time. This is that. Whatever. It's easy to just go on, even with the Sabbath, to go on automatic without really considering our ways. Why are we doing this? What's the purpose? Why would God want me to do it this way or do that or not do this? Why?
Okay, Exodus 16 is the point I was trying to get to earlier. The Lord brought these slaves. He freed them from the bonds of the Egyptians. And then he retaught them an important lesson on Sabbath observance. What did he do to teach them about the Sabbath? The manna. Okay, it was a honey-like wafer that he gave to them. How did they receive it?
Boring.
Boring.
They thought it was boring after a while.
After 40 years, they thought it was boring, yes. Angel food. How did they get the manna?
6 days a week, double the portion to Friday.
Okay, 6 days a week they had to get up. Could they stay in bed till noontime? Why not?
He was early.
There's
You
an
wouldn't be
inter-
there.
there's an interesting lesson there. If we wait till noon to have worship in the morning to eat that heavenly food, usually it doesn't happen. Usually by that time, well, even noon, forget noon, but if the longer, seems to me like, at least in my life, the longer I wait, the longer I get distracted from morning devotions, the less apt I am to put in much time. Because other things just keep, and then the phone rings, and then you're supposed to be here. If you don't get that manna early, sometimes you don't get it at all.
Right. So it's, the first lesson is you need to get up early. You need to be out, and you had to gather it. Wasn't Ubered to your door. You had to get out and gather it. So my understanding is that, and we're talking, how many people were the children of Israel when they were freed from Egypt? 1 million, 2 million? And so their tents were scattered out. But if you didn't get up and get outside your tent and get the manna that was close by, and you've got tents and it's millions of people, how far would you have to go to gather your manna? So I think there was an incentive for you to get up early, to get out, to get that which was close, because if what was already by your tent was gathered, you had to beat feet and find some area where it was. So I think it was an incentive to them to get up early, to get out and to gather. Could they eat it on the way back to the tent? What were you going to say?
I was going to say it took effort. It took effort. And then once they had it, they had to prepare it. They had to assimilate it.
Right. You could boil it. You could see that there's different ways that you could process it, but just to go out and gather it was only the first work. Then you had to come home, and then you had to prepare it. I think it's interesting that the Lord did this miracle for 40 years, every day, and then it was a double miracle, because if you tried to keep it over, it bred worms and stank. But on Friday, as Damaris said, you got a double portion, and you could prepare it, and it would actually keep over from Friday until Sabbath.
And I think there is a lesson of obedience on this story. And then because they did not follow God's instructions, they fall short. And then that's why they was errant to that for 40 years. It's supposed to take them a short period of time. And then if we do not pay attention the same way they fall short, we might falling short as well, because we know the stories. We know the experience. We know where they were falling. But if we do not pay attention, because when God gave them manna, I think it's a way to teach them they are to be completely dependent on God and follow His instructions. And then it is the same thing for us today.
Can you imagine that there was a day that the children of Israel went out and there wasn't any manna there? How faithful was God? Every morning they went out and there was manna for them to be able to gather. Every morning, except for the Sabbath
I'm
morning.
thinking that manna must have been fairly deep, because how would I've often thought, it'd be easy to scoop up a bunch of gravel, if it wasn't fairly deep, unless God somehow made it easier for them. But if it was only an inch or two deep, that'd be a chore,
Yeah. Well, it says it was like the hoarfrost, and what I see, the spider web is not very deep, so I don't know. I mean, But for millions of people to be able to gather for your family, it had to be plentiful.
They must have been good skimmers.
Yep. Our time is running out, so I want to get over to Tuesday's lesson. It talks about time for learning priorities. Can someone read Isaiah 58, verses 13 and 14 for us, please? Isaiah 58 is one of those chapters that we're told we should put to memorization. We should read it often. We should know what the words are. And we should understand what the Lord wants to do through us and for others through us in this chapter. So verses 13 and 14, someone please.
If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasure, nor speaking thine own words, then shalt thou delight thyself in the Lord, and I will cause thee to ride upon the high places of the earth, and feed thee with the heritage of Jacob thy father, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it.
I think it's interesting that he says here, from doing thine own pleasure on his holy day. And there is a conversion that takes place as we do this, because don't we find pleasure in doing for others? When Christ was here, and specifically on the Sabbath day, we have some illustrations in the lesson there later about a woman that had an issue, and apparently she was bent over, and Christ went to heal her on the Sabbath day, and the religious leaders were like, "Oh, you can't do that on the Sabbath day," and Christ came back with what I think is just so appropriate, and he used the word hypocrites. You have a donkey that's tied up, and yet you untie him from his stall and you lead him out to water so that he can be refreshed on the Sabbath day. And he says, shouldn't this woman who's been held captive all these years be loosed on the Sabbath day as well, to receive a blessing, to receive some refreshment? The donkey gets refreshing from drinking the water, and this woman can be refreshed as well on the Sabbath day. So, and he says, it's lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. Steve?
That's where it's mentioned earlier. They got caught up in all the, do nots, this, do not that, the rules and laws they all put up about, and forgot the purpose of the Sabbath. Christ was there to reintroduce what the Sabbath was really there for. As he said, the Sabbath was made for man. It was supposed to be a blessing for us. And in it, we're supposed to find that blessing with that relationship built with God, that time spent, and then the relationship we built with others as we spend time, direct them, help them, and show them God during those hours as well. It was supposed to be a double blessing there. But unfortunately, the Pharisees lost it all in, we've got to make sure everything is so perfect around the edges. They add so many different extra things that God never intended, that they lost the focus of what God intended it for. When you read Isaiah 58, as you'd mentioned, we got the last clip, when you go in the beginning, it starts off by God talking about how they were doing all these things he asked, but they lost the whole point behind it.
Right.
They let all society and their fellow brethren fall apart, basically, while they were still coming and worshiping God. And that's not what he wanted. And then that was just the culmination of it. They so easily lost the sight of what the Sabbath was supposed to mean and be.
I just want to make a comment here. I think many people have read this book, The 7-Day Ox, where if you haven't read it, just read it. But But God used an animal for this preacher that was in prison to really fulfill his priority was to keep the Sabbath. And he was trying to do everything else. And then the Lord made the miracle of this ox to do that last water hole at Friday so he can have his Sabbath off. So, I mean, if God can do that for him, using an animal, he can do a lot for us if we put him as a priority in our lives, especially to keep the Sabbath the right way. So.
We have watched a program, and I don't know where, the guy lives in Canada, but he and his family found this family of this river, and it had beavers. And he would go there and watch them, and every day of the week they do their job. They cut the trees down, they build a lodge. But every Sabbath they would never find them. They are the seventh-day beavers. And he kept a record for a long time, but these beavers never worked on the Sabbath. And it's just, you wonder about the other animals. It just really is amazing to me, and how observant that fellow was, that family, to do that. Maybe that's happening in other animals' lives too, and we don't even know it. But if a beavers honor God, certainly we should be honoring God.
Yeah, he discovered them because a fellow neighbor told him about a bee colony that he noticed the activity was way low on the Sabbath day as well. And so there were bees that were keeping the Sabbath day holy as well. Close with this thought. You know, we're told that on the sixth day of creation, after Adam was created, that his job was to name the animals. So his work was done on Friday. But on Sabbath, I think, was whenever he got to ask God the questions as to, why is this animal made this way? Why is this flower constructed this way? And it was during the Sabbath hours, I believe, that God answered a lot of his questions as to the creation. And I know we had a friend that would share with us that if she had a particular scripture that she was struggling to understand, she always pushed it aside till the Sabbath. And in the Sabbath, she would take time and dig into it. And she said more times than not, she got the answer to the questioning of that scripture on the Sabbath day, because God was near. And he would explain those things to her on the Sabbath day. And he'll do the same for us. So it's time for us to close. So let's bow our heads for prayer. Our gracious Father, thank you again for your blessings. We know that we do not deserve them, but we're so grateful for your guidance and direction. We thank you for the insights here this morning in studying your word. And it is true that what Finley said, that we're only going to be convicted of keeping the Sabbath, not breaking any of the other commandments, but the seventh one. We know that you've put a hedge about it. And we know that it's a hedge about us as well. It's our protection when we worship and follow your leading and directing. So we pray that you'll help us to recognize the importance of the Sabbath day and drawing close to you, because we know that you said that you draw close to us, especially on that day. May our hearts and our minds be prepared for the special blessing that you have that will follow in today's message. Thank you again for the blessing of like believers, so that we can come apart and do a corporate worship together and lifting our voices to your praises. And we thank you for this in Christ's dear name. Amen.